I always thought if my marriage ever collapsed, it would be something dramatic, like a midlife crisis where Emily suddenly decided she wanted to live on a boat, or maybe a tragic misunderstanding involving a long-lost twin. You know, something worthy of a movie script. But no. Turns out, real life has a much duller sense of humor. It started with a treadmill. Not a metaphorical treadmill, not the exhausting routine of life. I mean an actual treadmill. The heavy, awkward, why did we ever buy this thing kind that sits in the corner of your house collecting dust until one day you decide, hey, maybe I should use that instead of pretending it doesn't exist. Emily had been on a health kick for months. Smoothies, yoga, weird green powders that made our kitchen smell like freshly mowed grass. And, of course, the treadmill. She'd been using it every morning before work, running like she was in training for the Olympics or at least trying to outrun the guilt of eating carbs. Now, I don't believe in exercise. Not in the it's fake way, but more in the if I was meant to run, I wouldn't have been born with a perfectly good couch way. Still, the treadmill was there. And on that particular morning, I figured, why not? I laced up a pair of sneakers that I hadn't touched since college, stepped onto the belt, and hit the button. The machine groaned to life, reluctantly waking up like a teenager forced out of bed for school. I started slow, adjusting to the feeling of movement beneath me. And that's when it happened. A flash drive. It was small, barely noticeable, wedged deep in the side pocket of the treadmill's control panel. The kind of place you toss things when you're in a hurry, or trying to hide something. Now, I'm not a suspicious guy. I firmly believe that most problems in life can be ignored until they go away or become someone else's issue. But curiosity is a terrible thing. It makes you do reckless stuff, like putting a USB drive into your laptop without knowing if it's going to unleash a virus that drains your bank account and sends embarrassing emails to your boss. Still, I did it. Because, you know, human nature. The folder opened, and at first, I thought maybe Emily was just keeping work files on it. A spreadsheet, a few PDFs, nothing too alarming. But then, nestled between a document titled Q1 Sales Report and another one labeled Budget Planning, there was a video file. And that's where things took a turn. Let me clarify, I was not expecting a video of my wife doing anything suspicious. I figured it was a workout tutorial or maybe one of those motivational speeches she liked listening to. Something about taking control of your life, being your best self, all that nonsense. But no. The moment I hit play, I knew two things. This was definitely not a TED Talk. I was going to need a much stronger cup of coffee. The camera was shaky at first, then settled. And there she was, Emily, sitting on our couch, her legs tucked under her like she was just another happily married woman who definitely hadn't misplaced her moral compass. And next to her? Someone else. A man. I stared at the screen, my brain refusing to process what I was seeing. He was younger, a little too put together, like the kind of guy who actually reads the instructions before assembling furniture. Clean-shaven, expensive-looking watch, the kind of guy who probably owns a leather notebook just for writing down thoughts. Emily was laughing at something he said, her head tilted just slightly, her fingers grazing his arm in that casual, "Oh, I am just touching you by accident" way. I wanted to believe this was innocent, that maybe this was some kind of prank, that at any moment, they were going to start talking about a new project at work, or how much they both loved Seinfeld, or something, anything, that didn't make me feel like my marriage was a dumpster fire. But then the video kept playing, and I kept watching, and my coffee went cold. It wasn't what they were doing that hit me the hardest. Sure, the casual intimacy was enough to make my stomach twist, but it was more than that. It was the way she looked at him, like he was something new, something exciting, something she hadn't seen in me for a long time. I don't know how long I sat there, staring at the screen, letting the reality of it settle into my bones. But at some point, the video ended, and I was left with nothing but the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of birds chirping outside. I took the flash drive out, held it in my hand for a moment, and then did what any rational, level-headed husband would do. I put it right back where I found it. Because this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. I didn't say anything to Emily right away. That would have been the logical thing to do. But logic and I had parted ways the moment I watched my wife giggle like a schoolgirl next to a guy who looked like he exfoliated daily. Instead, I did what any reasonable person in my position would do. I observed. Now, I had never been an observant person. If Emily moved furniture around, it usually took me 3 weeks to notice. Once, she got a haircut, and I complimented her 4 days later, thinking she had just done something different with her hair that morning. But this? This gave me a sudden and unnatural ability to pick up on things I would have ignored before. For instance, I noticed that Emily had developed an entirely new habit of checking the locks before bed. It was subtle. She'd jiggle the front door handle once, then twice, then hesitate like she wasn't sure if she had done it correctly. Then she'd move to the back door, the one that led to our tiny patio, and do the same thing. Now, I wasn't a security expert, but I was pretty sure no one was breaking into our house to steal our unmatched socks and the IKEA furniture that took me 4 hours to assemble. So either she had suddenly developed a deep-seated fear of burglars, or she was worried about something else entirely. Then there was her phone. No, not in the obvious, "oh, she's hiding it now" kind of way. Emily wasn't careless. If anything, she was too careful. She didn't take it to the bathroom with her, didn't flip it over dramatically like she had something to hide. But she never left it charging in the kitchen anymore. It was always on her nightstand, always within arm's reach. I tested this theory one night by pretending to roll over in my sleep and knocking my own phone off the nightstand. I groaned, fumbled around in the dark, then reached towards hers like I was confused. She grabbed it before I even got close. "Oh, just making sure it didn't fall," she said, giving me a tight smile. Sure. Because the worst possible thing that could happen in this house was me mistaking her phone for mine at 2 a.m. But none of that was proof. It was just weird. And weird wasn't enough. That changed on a Tuesday. Emily had left for work like usual. She worked at a consulting firm, which meant she spent a lot of time making things sound important when they really weren't. Once, she spent an entire dinner explaining how she had helped a company optimize their client engagement funnel. When I asked what that actually meant, she blinked at me like I had just confessed I didn't know how to tie my own shoes. So when she left that morning, I did something I had never done before. I called in sick to work. Not because I actually felt sick, but because I had a sudden, overwhelming urge to know exactly what she was doing when she wasn't here. Now, I could have followed her, but that would have required effort, and honestly, I wasn't built for that kind of thing. So instead, I did something much more practical. I went through the things she had left behind. No, not in a creepy, rifling through her underwear drawer way. I wasn't trying to catch her like some second-rate detective in a bad crime show. I just wanted to see if there was anything out in the open. Something normal that, under different circumstances, I wouldn't have thought twice about. And that's when I found it. The notepad. It was in the living room, sitting neatly on the coffee table, like it had been left there absent-mindedly. Emily wasn't the type to leave things lying around. She was precise, organized. The kind of person who color-coded her closet and arranged her books by genre and height. At first, I thought it was her usual to-do list. Something about meal prepping or a reminder to buy that weird vitamin powder she swore helped her skin. But when I picked it up, the first thing I saw was a name I didn't recognize. Nathan. And next to it, a number. And below that, an address. Now, I don't claim to be a genius, but I knew enough to realize that this was not part of our usual grocery list. I stared at it for a long time. I could have ignored it, could have put it back, pretended I never saw it. But my brain was already running in overdrive, connecting dots I wasn't sure needed to be connected. Who was Nathan? Why was his number written down like this? And why did Emily, the woman who planned everything down to the minute, need to write down an address? There was only one way to find out. I grabbed my keys. It took me 20 minutes to get there. The address led to a building downtown, one of those modern places with too much glass and a lobby that smelled like wealth. It wasn't an office. It was an apartment complex. The kind where people with good jobs and expensive coffee habits lived. I sat in my car for a solid 5 minutes, staring at the front entrance, debating whether I had officially lost my mind. Then I saw her. Emily. Walking out of the building like she belonged there. She wasn't looking around nervously. She wasn't trying to be sneaky. She was just comfortable, casual, like she had done this 100 times before. I didn't need to see anything else. I already knew. There's a certain type of madness that sets in when you know something for sure, but the person responsible for making your life a joke is still acting like everything is fine. It's like watching a bad actor in a movie where you already know the twist, except the twist is your wife, and instead of being surprised, you're just sitting there thinking, really? This is how you're going to play it. Emily walked into the house at 6:12 p.m., exactly on schedule. She dropped her bag onto the counter, stretched her arms like she'd had a long day doing very serious work things, and looked at me like she always did, like she was already half distracted by something else. "Hey," she said casually, like she hadn't spent part of her day at an apartment that wasn't ours. I stared at her for a second, letting the silence sit just long enough to make it weird. "Hey," I said back. That was it. One word. Just enough weight behind it to let her know something was off, but not enough for her to immediately go on the defensive. She glanced at me, then went straight to the fridge, pulling out a bottle of water like she was auditioning for the role of completely innocent wife who has no secrets whatsoever. "I swear, today was insane," she said, twisting the cap open. Meeting after meeting, and then Lisa needed help with her project because, oh my God, she still doesn't understand how to put together a basic report. She laughed a little, rolling her eyes. "I don't know how that woman still has a job." "Oh, yes." The classic strategy, bury me in workplace drama to keep me from asking any real questions. If I hadn't spent the entire day thinking about what I was going to say, I might have let it slide. But I was done letting things slide. "So," I said, leaning against the counter, "you stopped by an apartment building today." "I didn't ask," I stated. Emily froze for half a second, just long enough for someone who knew her to catch it. Then she turned, eyebrows slightly furrowed, playing confused like a professional. "An apartment building?" she repeated, like I had just accused her of robbing a bank. "That's what I said." She took a sip of water. Took her time, like she was flipping through a mental Rolodex of excuses and trying to decide which one wouldn't blow up in her face. "Oh," she said finally, snapping her fingers like she'd just remembered something completely innocent. "Nathan's place." She said it so easily, like it was nothing. Like I was the one making this into something weird. "Nathan," I repeated, watching her reaction. She nodded, like she was relieved I knew the name. "Yeah, I should have told you. I was just dropping something off for him." "Really?" I said, tilting my head. "That's interesting, because you never mentioned a Nathan before." Another tiny pause. Then a carefully controlled laugh. "Donald, come on. I have mentioned him before." "Nope." She sighed, shaking her head like she was dealing with an unreasonable child. "He's Lisa's brother. He just moved to town, and he needed help setting up his Wi-Fi. So I told Lisa I'd swing by since I was already nearby." "Right. Of course. Because when people move to a new city, the first person they ask for help with their internet is their sister's coworker instead of, I don't know, literally anyone else they actually know." "Wi-Fi, huh?" I asked, letting the sarcasm drip from my voice. She nodded, going for nonchalant but missing the mark by a mile. "Yeah. And you needed to write down his address and phone number like it was some kind of top-secret information?" Emily exhaled sharply, like she couldn't believe I was still questioning her about this. "I just wrote it down because Lisa told me over the phone, and I didn't want to forget." "Oh, sure. That makes sense. And you had to spend, what, an hour there? Hour and a half? Because Wi-Fi is so complicated." She rolled her eyes. "It wasn't just the Wi-Fi. He needed help with a couple of things." "A couple of things," I echoed. "Like?" She hesitated. "And that was it. That was all I needed." People don't hesitate when they're telling the truth. They just say it. They don't need to craft a careful response like they're giving a press conference. Emily knew she had slipped up. I can see it in the way she shifted her weight, the way she glanced at her water bottle like it might save her. So I went in for the kill. "I know you're lying." She opened her mouth to respond, but I kept going. "I didn't just pull this out of nowhere. I know where you were. I know it wasn't about Wi-Fi. I know you're lying to my face right now, and honestly, I want to see how long you're going to keep this up before you finally admit it." Her mouth snapped shut. For the first time, I saw real panic in her eyes. Not annoyance. Not mild irritation. Actual, real panic. She placed the water bottle down on the counter, her fingers tapping against the surface. "I don't." "Stop." I cut her off. "Just stop." Silence. For once, she didn't have a response ready. No quick deflection, no fake outrage about how I was being ridiculous. Just her standing there, staring at me, realizing that whatever game she was playing, she had officially lost. I wasn't going to yell. I wasn't going to demand an explanation. Because at this point, I didn't need one. The moment she hesitated, the moment she started scrambling for excuses, she had already given me every answer I needed. I crossed my arms, letting the silence hang between us. Then, finally, she spoke. "What do you want me to say?" I let out a short laugh. A tired, unamused, "Are you serious right now" kind of laugh. "You really don't know?" She swallowed. But she didn't finish. Because she knew. And I knew. And there was nothing left to say. Emily didn't try to defend herself after that. She just stood there, blinking, probably running through every excuse in the book before realizing that none of them were going to work. It was a rare moment of self-awareness for her. I let the silence drag on, waiting to see if she'd attempt some last-minute Hail Mary play, but all she did was shift her weight from one foot to the other like a guilty kid caught sneaking into the cookie jar. Except instead of a cookie, it was our marriage, and instead of sneaking, she had basically just set it on fire. Now, a better man might have sat her down and talked about emotions, about why she did it, about how we got to this point. But let's be honest, I wasn't in the mood for some deep, philosophical discussion on the state of our relationship. I was in the mood for something else entirely. I wanted to win. And Emily? She wasn't going to see it coming. The next morning, I acted like nothing had happened. No anger, no passive-aggressive comments, no sudden burst of inspiration to start dramatically packing my bags. If anything, I was nicer than usual. "Morning," I said cheerfully as she walked into the kitchen, probably expecting me to still be sulking in a corner somewhere. She hesitated. Morning. Coffee?" I asked, holding up the pot. Her eyes narrowed like she was trying to figure out if I had laced it with something. "Sure." I poured her a cup, slid it across the counter, and smiled. A big smile. The kind I usually reserved for holiday pictures or when I needed to convince my boss I actually cared about my job. Emily took a sip, still watching me like I was a science experiment. "Are you okay?" "Of course," I said, all bright and enthusiastic. "Why wouldn't I be?" More hesitation. She had expected anger, maybe some yelling. But kindness? That was throwing her off. And that was exactly what I wanted. She left for work a little unsettled, which was perfect because it meant she wouldn't be paying attention to what I was doing for the rest of the day. Step 1. Set the groundwork. I spent the morning going through all the shared accounts, bank, streaming services, even the grocery delivery app she swore by. Then I changed every password. Every single one. Next, I made a few adjustments to our joint finances. Nothing illegal, just smart. Emily had always been careless with money. Not in a reckless, buying a yacht kind of way, but in a let's subscribe to this expensive skincare box and forget about it for 6 months way. She didn't pay attention to bills. That was my job. She just assumed things got taken care of. So, I took care of them. I canceled a few things in her name, adjusted a few auto-pay settings, and oops, suddenly, her credit card payments weren't going through. Step 2. Social. Now, Emily had built her entire identity around being that person online. You know the type, the one who posts inspirational quotes about self-growth while secretly treating customer service workers like dirt. She curated everything to look just right, from vacation photos to pretending she had the perfect marriage. Hilarious, really. So, naturally, I decided it was time for a social media refresh. I logged into our shared accounts, Facebook, Instagram, even LinkedIn, and made some minor updates. Nothing too obvious. Just subtle changes. Like replacing her usual happily married status with something more accurate. Relationship status? Removed. Profile picture? Changed to an old, embarrassing one from college. Bio? A classic, simple update, just figuring things out. Then I scrolled through her friends list and started unfollowing people. Randomly. Just enough to make her notice, but not enough to seem deliberate. Step 3. The grand finale. By the time Emily got home, I was sitting on the couch, flipping through a magazine like I hadn't spent the entire day orchestrating the perfect revenge. She walked in, looking tense. "Did you change the Netflix password?" "Oh yeah," I said, not looking up. "I was cleaning up some accounts." She frowned. "Okay, well, I tried to pay for lunch today, and my card got declined." I nodded. "Yeah, banks can be weird sometimes. You should probably call them." Her frown deepened. "Also, people are texting me asking if we're okay. Did you do something to my social media?" I finally looked up, pretending to think. "Oh, right." I figured since we were both figuring things out, it made sense to update a few things. You know, transparency and all. Silence. Then she finally snapped. "What are you doing?" I shrugged. "Nothing crazy. Just making things a little more even." She opened her mouth, then closed it, realizing that for the first time, she had absolutely no control over the situation. And that was the best part of all. Emily stood in the middle of the living room, her face twisted in that specific kind of frustration she reserved for things that inconvenienced her personally, like slow Wi-Fi or people who walked too slowly in grocery store aisles. "What do you mean, figuring things out?" she asked, voice sharper than it had been in years. I leaned back on the couch, stretching my legs out like I had all the time in the world. "I mean exactly what it sounds like. You're figuring things out. I'm figuring things out. Everyone's figuring things out. She crossed her arms, her signature move when she wanted to make it seem like she was in control. This isn't funny, Donald. Oh, I agree, I said, nodding. It's hilarious. Her mouth tightened. You changed my social media. I did. You canceled my subscriptions. Yep. My credit card is frozen. Oh, you noticed that? I grinned. Weird how money works when you don't pay attention to it. She exhaled loudly, the kind of breath that meant she was mentally counting to 10 so she wouldn't say something she'd regret. Which was ironic, considering regret was probably something she should have thought about before sneaking off to some guy's apartment. Are you trying to punish me? She asked, finally cutting to the chase. I tilted my head. Punish? No, Emily. This isn't punishment. This is balance. I'm just making sure that things feel fair. She stared at me like she was waiting for me to break, for me to yell, or cry, or beg her to fix this. But I wasn't going to do any of that. I had already won, and she knew it. After a long pause, she dropped her arms, shoulders slumping just slightly. Okay, you got your fun. Now let's stop acting like kids and talk about this like adults. Oh, you want to talk now? I asked, raising an eyebrow. That's interesting, because you didn't seem too eager to talk when you were busy having secret meetings at some random apartment. Her jaw tightened. You don't know what you're talking about. Emily, I said, my voice finally losing its humor. We're past this part. I know. You know I know. Just say it. She looked away, like the ceiling had suddenly become the most fascinating thing in the world. It wasn't what you think. Then what was it? Silence. I waited, gave her every opportunity to come up with something that would at least be entertaining. But there was nothing. No grand speech, no desperate attempt to rewrite history. Just silence. For the first time, I saw it on her face, the understanding that this wasn't going to be one of those situations where she talked her way out of trouble. That I wasn't going to be the forgiving husband who worked through it because marriages take effort or some other nonsense she probably read in a self-help book. I stood up, stretching like this was any other normal day. I'm moving out, I said simply. That got her attention. Her eyes snapped back to me. What? You heard me. I grabbed my jacket from the chair. You can have the house. It'll be easier that way. She blinked. You're serious. Dead serious. Now she looked actually thrown off. She had expected a fight. An argument. A dramatic explosion of emotions that she could counter with some carefully rehearsed speech about mistakes and second chances. But this was something she hadn't planned for. Just like that, she asked. Just like that. Her lips parted slightly, and for a brief second, I thought she might actually say something that resembled an apology. But she didn't. Because she wasn't actually sorry. She was just panicked. Where are you going? She asked. I smiled. Wouldn't you like to know? And with that, I walked out the door. Emily didn't chase after me. She didn't call my name, beg me to come back, or throw herself dramatically onto the floor like some third-rate actress in a soap opera. No, she just stood there, watching, probably trying to figure out if this was some elaborate bluff. Like I was going to walk outside, take a deep breath, and come back in with some grand speech about how we should try therapy or whatever nonsense people say when they're too afraid to admit the ship has already sunk. But I didn't stop. I walked to my car, got in, and left. Not because I had a plan, but because I didn't need one. The best thing about realizing your marriage is over is that you're suddenly free of obligations. There's no need to tiptoe around someone's feelings, no reason to pretend you still care about whatever nonsense they're rambling about over dinner. It's like being released from a contract you didn't realize you had signed, and the fine print at the bottom says, "Congratulations. You no longer have to deal with this person's nonsense." So, naturally, the first thing I did was check into a hotel. Not some fancy 5-star resort with a minibar that cost more than my monthly internet bill. Just a decent place with a bed, a TV, and a shower that actually worked. It was quiet, which was exactly what I needed. Then, I did what any reasonable man in my position would do. I made a list. Now, I've never been a write things down kind of guy. That was always Emily's thing. She had notebooks filled with to-do lists, reminders, and goals, because apparently, writing by more laundry detergent in perfect cursive made it feel more important. But this list? This wasn't a grocery list. This was the list of things Donald is finally free to do without dealing with Emily's commentary. Wake up whenever I want. Emily was a morning person, which meant I was forced to be a morning person. Now, if I wanted to sleep in until noon, I could. If I wanted to wake up at 6 a.m. just to roll over and go back to sleep out of pure spite, that was an option too. Buy normal soap. For years, Emily insisted on buying the kind of soap that smelled like a combination of tree bark and crushed hopes. Apparently, it was natural and good for the skin. I didn't care. I wanted soap that did what soap was supposed to do, make me not smell bad. Watch terrible movies without judgment. Emily had opinions about my taste in entertainment. If I wanted to watch an action movie where things exploded for no reason, I'd get a speech about how unrealistic it was. If I wanted to watch a full comedy, I'd hear about how immature my sense of humor was. You know what? I was free now. If I wanted to watch a movie so bad it had a 12% rating on some website run by snobby film critics, I could. Throw away the decorative towels. For years, we had towels that I wasn't allowed to use. Towels that just sat there, existing for no reason. No? They were gone. Never hear the phrase, "we need to talk again." That alone was worth the entire breakup. I sat back, staring at my masterpiece. The list wasn't long, but it was perfect. And then my phone buzzed. I didn't even have to look at the screen to know who it was. Emily. Of course. Now, I could have ignored it. Could have let her sit there, waiting for a response that was never going to come. But something in me wanted to know what her first attempt at damage control was going to be. So, I opened the message. Emily, so this is how you handle things? Just walking away? I laughed. Actually laughed. Because yes, Emily, this is how I handle things. By leaving. By not sitting through another discussion where she tried to twist things around and make herself the victim. I didn't reply. 10 minutes later, another message. Emily, you're being dramatic. We should at least talk. Ah, there it was. The classic attempt to act like I was the one making things complicated. As if she wasn't the one who had single-handedly turned our marriage into a joke. Still no reply. Then, the final one. Emily, fine. Be a child. But don't come crawling back when you realize you made a mistake. And that was when I knew. She still thought I'd come back. That was the funniest part of all. I turned off my phone, stretched out on the bed, and flipped on the TV. It took me about 5 seconds to find exactly what I wanted, an action movie with zero plot, terrible dialogue, and at least 3 explosions in the first 10 minutes. Finally, freedom. Thanks for watching. Rate the story in the comments. Subscribe to the channel